everyone, and welcome to Making Sense of AI in Compliance. What works, what doesn't, and why humans still matter. I'm Jess Denny, I'm Head of Comms and Marketing at Xapien, and today we're going to talk about a clear-eyed view of where humans fit in and where AI fits in, and how the two can complement each other for a truly risk-based due diligence. We hope that after this, you'll have some real practical insights on where AI can fit into your organization, what its value is, what its limitations are, and where human judgment is going to remain absolutely vital. It's going to be a 45-minute session with 30 minutes panel discussion and some time for questions at the end. If you do have burning questions as we go, please pop them through. I'll keep an eye on them, but I'll probably save most of them for the end just to keep our flow. We'll be recording this webinar and we'll share the recording afterwards, along with email addresses so that you can follow up with us with any further questions. And we will also be sending a link to our upcoming conference on the 8th of October, which I can talk a bit more about at the end. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand over to our wonderful speakers to introduce themselves rather than butchering it myself. So I'll hand over to Mintz. Erin, would you like to go first, please?
Sure, Jess. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful that you could join us today. I joined Mintz Group in the firm's corporate risk and due diligence practice almost a year ago after, more than 20 years in the investigations and due diligence industry. I have spent a lot of that time helping clients in the compliance space with third-party risk management programs, KYC due diligence, sanction screening, and the like. And along that journey, I have had a lot of exposure on the product and platform side, including working alongside my technology and product teams to develop those tools. So it was kind of a natural fit for me to be aligned with the AI efforts at Mintz Group. And as we were exploring our own use of AI and that which we knew could provide great value to our clients, Xapien really stood out to us, given that it wasn't tailored to just one type of record or search. It instead is able to kind of quickly and effectively develop a more robust profile on a subject. And that very much appealed to us. So we became a bit ago a Xapien partner and have integrated their product into our end-to-end spectrum of investigative and due diligence products and services. So our clients have benefited greatly from the wonderful coverage that Xapien's AI provides, such as background details, media, watch list data, and corporate affiliations, all at a more cost-effective price point. So we are very happy to be partners with Xapien, and with that, I will turn it over to Yahya.
Thanks, Erin.
Thank you, Aaron. And I'm Yahya Mukhtar. I'm head of product here at Mintz. So like Aaron, I've been in the industry for a while. I started 10 years ago as an analyst, actually working on exactly this type of work, compliance research, doing background checks in different industries, different countries, different languages. I've been with Mint since 2018 now, and my primary focus in the last 5, 6 years has been on the product innovation side. So exactly to Aaron's theme, as we looked at a company at the landscape of how technology was evolving even before generative AI was, in the mainstream media, and it became pretty clear that if in order for us to service our clients in the best way possible, we needed to invest and bring in our know-how as an investigative company into the technology space. So that's the role I sit in, managing our, product and technology teams and working closely with partners like Xapien as well.
Thank you so much. And we're so delighted to have you here as partners and to be partnered with such an innovative firm. Emily.
Great, thank you, Jess. My name's Emily Morgan. I joined Xapien a couple of months ago. Very much have a background in compliance. I spent 6 years in the control risk business intelligence Middle East team, running complex due diligence and investigations projects for clients, and then spent 7 years in their third-party risk management solution team, which is called Vantage, before joining Xapien as Global Partnerships Director. So I'm thrilled to be working with Erin and Yahya on the joint solution. And bring some of that background, all of that background from control risk to the work that I do and to the partnership. So, I've worked with big corporations who are trying to map out their vetting processes from end to end and really trying to capitalize on technology. So technologies have been a part of my journey with compliance solutions, trying to make them scalable and efficient for a long time. And so I was very excited to join Xapien and be part of the new revolution of AI in the compliance space as well. So really excited to be working on all of these projects.
Brilliant. Thank you. I think we all have a background in compliance. I was actually originally a client of Xapien's as a risk analyst as well, and then couldn't help but jump to the dark side. So hopefully we all have appreciation and understanding of the role of humans and AI and how we do still need both. So let's just set the scene a bit on the traditional compliance landscape. And Erin, I'll come to you on that. In your experience, how are most companies managing their third-party due diligence programs right now? And how's that changed over recent years?
So I'll start at the beginning. Many years ago, I would say where and if companies were even thinking about compliance and even more specifically about due diligence on their counterparties, this work, I think most of us can remember, was all very manual in nature. It was clunky, it was not all that cost effective, and in many cases wasn't that supported by management. So now part of that was also that the intelligence gathering behind that was also clunky, given the manual way in which records still needed to be accessed. Across the years, as government oversight and regulations were enhanced, I would say especially in the 2000s when FCPA enforcement really jumped substantially, compliance really could no longer be ignored. And companies began trying to find a way to logically implement due diligence programs while not spending gobs of money on every counterparty they wanted to do business with. So at that time, I would say a risk-based approach was really formed. So nowadays, as compliance teams have become better supported and more robust, there has become this typical, I would say, flow to the process, which, as many of you probably know, includes kind of the onboarding and initial screening process, which feeds into risk ranking and triaging to enhance due diligence, and then that kind of cycle of remediation and ongoing monitoring. So as you can imagine, I would say the availability and indexing of records online over the past kind of 20, 25 years has come a very long way. And the government really now expects companies to be taking advantage of these advances with more sophisticated approaches. Therefore, in today's world, I would say a number of, kind of the sub-processes within these compliance programs are automated in some way, while some are still quite manual.
Thank you. And do you find it varies by sector?
So I would say, while the overarching kind of steps and themes and some of the objectives are fairly consistent, there are a good deal of nuances based on sector. So compliance is a very broad term. So for example, if you're talking about a bank's KYC program, they will have different regulatory requirements, risk thresholds, and methods of remediation than, say, a medical device manufacturer working to manage risk on their distributors around the world. However, this notion of risk-based due diligence, and even perhaps kind of the general levels of due diligence, may be fairly aligned. So in both scenarios and others, because I know there are many others outside of just third-party due diligence and KYC, I would say there are areas that are very ripe for applying AI, given the kind of recurring and consistent nature of some of the tasks within those programs.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And so just the final question on looking at what today's reality looks like. What would you say some of the advantages and challenges of these traditional approaches is?
So the traditional approaches are really, I guess, tried and true. And there's good precedent that they satisfy regulators, if, of course, you are managing them properly. The risk-based method also allows you to better focus your labor time and ultimately your spend on your higher risk counterparties. That being said, despite the advances in technology and platforms that have come to be in the past 10, 15 years, I still see in some cases an underutilization of that technology. And for those who have actually embraced it, these programs are still, they still have numerous working parts, and inefficiency is still a big burden for a lot of organizations. Um, the speed in which due diligence can properly be done, given the complexities of information gathering, especially internationally, can at times not align with the needs and expectations of the business. So, for example, I was on a call a couple of weeks ago talking through some KYC options with a company, and they indicated that from the time their potential client is identified to the time that they actually will be providing their service to that client could be no longer than a week. And having a KYC compliance process that extends past that time would just not work for their business. So I also hear a good bit from clients about budget pressures, from leadership being a hindrance, and which really leads to both kind of constraints from and limitations on resources and capacity. So a good number of organizations just don't have the bandwidth or the bodies to tackle all aspects of their compliance program in-house. I could probably list out another 10 challenges, but I'll stop there so we can, of course, touch upon how AI can help alleviate some of those challenges.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of the constraints and the pressure from across the business that from the C-suite and downwards and all across is such a challenge for all compliance leaders. So it's obviously not a magic wand, but Emily, let's have a look at where you think AI really can add value and where you're seeing it work in practice.
Sure. I mean, I think speaking to Erin's points just now, I think it can actually really change some of the structure around the risk-based approach because it can allow you to do more research up front. So to do more of what you would typically do further down the line or just on your higher risk third parties right from the off, giving you a much clearer sense of risk up front and allowing you to then escalate or do further investigation or mitigate right from the off, or even decide not to work with a third party and then not waste or invest a load of time that you're going to discover down the line wasn't needed because you can't work with them. So that's one thing. I think there are other sort of challenges with human due diligence just by the sheer volume of information that's out there. You're going to have limited resources and time, as Erin's described. And so, however you want to tackle that research, you're going to have to choose where to draw the lines, whether it's we're going to look at a certain number of pages in Google and then call it quits. We're going to look at certain types of sources. We're going to spend a certain amount of time, maybe, or choosing languages. You have to select upfront which languages you're going to cover based on the footprint you're identifying for a third party. You don't have those challenges with AI because it's fully automated. It's language agnostic initially, so it can go out and search every language at once and bring back anything that's relevant, whatever language it may be. It's not, constrained by the same time limitations that a human is. So it can cast the wider net much more quickly and get you those results faster as well. And I think that gives a certain level of assurance because you never know when you're having to put those strict parameters in place for human-led due diligence. You never know, was there something in the next page or the next hit or the next hour of research that I might have found that didn't come up because I had to choose to stop somewhere? Because really the internet is infinite in a sense, depending on the profile of your subject. So I think really what it can do is replicate a lot of that effort of the more tedious and arduous tasks that a human has to do. It's the information gathering, and then on top of that, the analysis a human would bring to it by using key identifiers to conduct false positive review, work out, for example, is the Yahya Mukhtar I'm looking at in this article actually the Yahya Mukhtar from Mintz, who I'm interested in, for example. And AI can use, if you have a good tool that's smart enough, AI can use key identifiers to run that kind of analysis for you. And I know that that's something in Xapien we've worked really, really hard on developing technology to get very smart at doing that by building a knowledge graph around your subject. And then you can use natural language processing to actually read and digest the information, and categorize it and flag key risks and all of that kind of review that a human would do. It can replicate that and streamline that for you so that you can actually manifest something that looks an awful lot like a due diligence report that a human being would have done, that's saying actually, on this date there was this corruption incident, and over in France there was this civil lawsuit around workers' rights or whatever it may be that you found, and it can categorize those and flag them for you and summarize them into a narrative form. And I think that's a game changer in this industry, because a lot of information gathering automated tools up until now have felt a bit like a data dump or a scrape. Sometimes they're actually database driven, so it's searching only a pre-populated database of information, and if something's not in there, it's just not in there. So the search might be quicker, but will be much more limited. But equally, it hasn't got that ability to digest and categorize and write up the information in as sophisticated a way as you can do now with AI. So all of that leads to massive cost savings, time savings, and efficiencies, and allows a better oversight of risk, really. In Xapien, we say that for every minute the report runs, it's roughly equivalent to an hour's worth of research, just to give a flavor of the amount of time that can be saved. So an 8-minute report in Xapien is pretty much equivalent to what it would take at least an 8-hour day to put together as a human researcher doing that work. And that's obviously, it's not had to take even a lunch break or a loo break or anything like that along the way. So, that the amount of time that it can save is immense. And we've got some of our partners, I know Pinson and Masons shared with us that their partners, this is a major law firm, and their partners were spending at least 3 hours on client review before even getting to the client project work. And as you can imagine, a partner's time in a law firm comes at a cost, and that time can then be completely redirected to the project work itself if you're able to use AI to do that. And similarly, we were talking to an enterprise the other day who has 100,000 third parties across its books, a major enterprise. They were saying they're only able to really do due diligence on about 1,000 of them, and the rest is very sort of high level screening, and that's just simply because you have to work with what's feasible. And this comes back to Erin's point about the risk-based approach. Whereas, with a tool like Xapien, or any, AI tool that's good enough to handle this kind of data, you can screen on a lot more of those third parties and actually not be spending as long or having as much of a hindrance to business. I think their current due diligence process takes at least 7 to 10 working days. So you can just imagine how much more quickly you can get to the project work itself with a tool that uses AI.
Thanks, Emily. Really helpful. A slightly sort of different take on ROI there. It's that save time and what you can do with it. The time to bill clients faster, for example, in a law firm. I think you also just highlighted a couple of things to call out about how in your traditional approach, people are making a very stark choice between a very surface level report, or they have to wait a lot of time, whereas AI can come in and mean that they don't have to compromise in that scenario. I think it's important to clarify, because I definitely want to ask you about some of the risks and challenges around AI. But I think we should also just clarify for this room that we're not advocating for the use of your kind of general purpose tools, like those brilliant tools that are out there, but aren't really fit for this purpose. So whether it's ChatGPT or Claude or any of those, which are excellent research tools, but you couldn't use them for due diligence. So we're talking about specific designed models here that have been adapted and use a number of different models to make them robust for this purpose. So Emily, yeah, maybe to call out some of the things that people are going to be mindful of, some of the red flags that start going off when you start talking about using AI in compliance. What are some of those that you hear a lot, and how can you address them?
Yeah, and I think it's such an important part of this conversation. There's a lot of confusion out there still around what some of these tools can do and how they work. I know that something that's been in the news a lot lately is hallucinations. We get a lot of people that we're speaking to raising that as a concern, and I think it's a really valid and important concern. And this is where an AI solution will make up facts and present them as true. And that's largely because, the types of Gen AI solutions you've just described there, Jen, so your OpenAI's ChatGPT or Google's Gemini, for example, they're designed as a linguistic model to try and predict what's a reasonable response to your question. And their goal is to answer your question in a reasonable way, kind of at any cost. And so it doesn't matter so much whether it's factually accurate all the time, as to whether or not they're actually finding a way to answer your question. So while they're absolutely brilliant at kind of, can you help me write this greetings card to, or a poem in a birthday card to my mum or whatever, they might not be your most reliable fact-finding tools that you would need in due diligence, because of course in this space in compliance there's a lot at stake, and you just can't afford to be having spurious facts being mixed with true data in there. I saw a Sky News report where a political editor was saying he'd been having a conversation with ChatGPT, I think it was, and he was asking for past scripts that he'd uploaded into the system, and saying how many scripts have I done over the last couple of months or something, and it turned up an entirely new script for an episode that had never taken place, and it was all fully referenced, and everything, it looked incredibly genuine. And then when he challenged it on whether or not it was made up, it even lied to him about making it up and started gaslighting him. So I mean, the risk around that is very real, and some of these these solutions, because they are designed slightly differently, that is part of the challenge, I think. I know in Xapien, again, that's something that we've really worked hard to manage, and we've actually, because our raison d'etre is compliance, we've built our solution with a very different framework than some of those models might use. So there's around 40 to 50 algorithms that make up the complexity of the Xapien tool. And many of them use LLMs, but every time an LLM is used, that's a large language model, it's used in a very ring-fenced way. It's given a very specific task with a very specific input and output, which allows our team to monitor very clearly whether it's doing exactly what we tell it to do or not. We're not kind of giving it the option to start thinking for itself in that sense, or have that black box risk that I've been describing. So our team are kind of rigorously testing and analyzing those different algorithms to ensure that LLMs are simply summarizing the facts. And I think you can see that in our reports, where if you ask Xapien AI a question within a report about the data it's gathered, and there isn't anything related to your question, it will simply come back and say nothing found on that point in the data that I've identified, which is very refreshing actually and reassuring, I think, when you're in a compliance space where, as I say, the risks are very high of that kind of spurious information creeping in. And I think another is around bias. We've seen instances of bias in AI as well. I think at Uber were recently caught out and taken to court by one of their workers for I think it was last year actually, a facial recognition software tool that was purportedly racist and biased against certain of its drivers. And we've seen just last week X's Grok coming out with some quite frightening anti-Semitic sentiment. So, some of these things, are real risks in using LLMs. And again, if that's not controlled in the tool that you're using, what's going to be the impact of that on any assessments that you're maybe drawing from it, and how you're doing that. So I think, understanding the tool that you're potentially thinking about using is really key. And at Xapien, we are developer-led as opposed to using automated learning on our tools, which allows protections against some of those kinds of biases. There's so much I could say on all of this, the false positive challenges that I've touched on already, the data quality issues in terms of, you need to know how to get good data out by putting good data in, all of those kinds of things. But hopefully I've touched on some of the key ones there that I think are top of mind for many people.
Thank you, Emily. Yeah, really, really helpful. And I am keen to come to Yahia now, to hear about why AI still can't replace humans. But first off, how are human research teams responding to AI introduction? And where are they finding their role around some of this amazing technology?
Yeah, sure, Jess. So, what I'm about to say applies to both, research teams in compliance departments, but really also clients and colleagues we speak to, basically anyone in this space who's, dealing with this AI question and what to do with it. And really what I've seen almost every time is this very clear spectrum of some people are, big AI advocates and I apologize. I think my camera may have frozen, but I am here. Um, Big AI advocates who are more blindly trusting it, I would say. So you hear like, oh, I copy pasted this from AI, or if you heard the infamous case in the US of a lawyer who took a brief from ChatGPT and didn't even bother reviewing it, came up with made up citations. But then, it's also an uneven distribution where on the other end, we also speak to clients, colleagues, people out in our lives who haven't had, a single chatbot experience yet with an AI, let alone use an AI-powered tool, right? So it won't surprise you. Our recommendation to all of those audiences has been to find the balance in between, right? The truth is always going to be somewhere in between. And from my approach as someone who is in product and technology and coming from the investigative space, I definitely see both sides, right? There are just some things that a human analyst, no matter how skilled and efficient, would not be able to do in 8, 10 minutes, right? But at the same time, there are places where AI alone would not be able to do it. So it's really finding the combination of the two. I think there's a good saying that the future is here, but it's not evenly distributed. And that's exactly true in the compliance space, especially when it comes to generative AI. So what does that look like in practice? I mean, one of there's a lot of sayings in the technology space I'm in these days, but you may have heard people say something like, where the internet lowered the cost of information, AI is going to lower the cost of intelligence, which I think is very true. Unfortunately, with the internet, we also have learned as societies what it's like for bad information to become cheap. It spreads more easily. check your social media feed for examples as soon as we hang up. And I would argue it's the same with AI, right? We have to make sure that AI lowers the cost of good intelligence, especially in the compliance and risk space. Because if it's cheap and quick, but it doesn't get you what you need to get, and you miss a big red flag on a potential third party or a client, for example, we know regulators will not, be comfortable with that just because you used AI and it seemed good to go. So really, it's finding that balance between those two. And going back to the point Emily touched on of data limitations, for example, um, it's very important to work with tools and partners like us who are familiar with the data that you need to even answer the questions that you're asking, right? We think of, a Google search or what is indexed on the web as very vast, which it is, but there's also a lot of information behind paywalls, behind logins that only certain entities or companies can get access to. If you've done enough research in your life, you also know there's still a lot of government records that are not even digitized, that are still on paper, that require, I know it sounds crazy in 2025, someone to go to a courthouse or a government office and take a picture of it or scan it, right? So what is the entirety of the public record that the regulator is expecting you to review when making a certain risk assessment, right? And how will the web itself evolve over time? There's now starting to be new types of web browsers that are made for AI agents because they just tackle things so differently from humans. So when you bring all that together, the way we see it at the Mintz Group is when looking at your compliance process, at the risk filters that you apply and the different approaches you would take, it's very important to keep that context and judgment, right, that experienced investigators can bring you, even when using AI, because Aaron and I, in some of our conversations, the answer to the client is, yeah, for this, tranche of your third parties, you should just use AI and start there, but also to know what to do with that after the fact and what to do when AI may not be enough on its own. So that's also where the human oversight angle comes in, which I believe Aaron will tackle next.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful because I think your point I want to hang on to, maybe we'll come back to, is what does a regulator expect? And how with this wealth of information that's going to change. But perhaps, yeah, a slightly blended question. I've got one, I'm mindful of time, of why human oversight is absolutely critical, even when you're using AI. But then further to that point, like how do you combine the two? How do they fit together neatly?
Mhm. So I told myself I was not going to use AI to compile my answers for this webinar, but I thought actually asking it this specific question would be a fun test. So AI told me that human oversight is critical in that AI lacks the nuanced judgment, contextual understanding, and ethical reasoning that these high stakes, high ambiguity investigations demand. So let me just say that I wholeheartedly agree. I give AI an A plus on that answer. And thinking back to kind of a real life example of this, I was doing kind of a relatively low level background investigation on a US based individual, and the name provided by our client was, first, middle, last name. The investigator ran that provided name and everything was clear. But when I was reviewing the report before it was going to go back to the client, even though the subject's first name was very kind of an Americanized name, the last name I thought was potentially Spanish. And I went back to the investigator and I said, I want to make sure that we have the full name. Can you do some more digging? And they did, and turned up a second surname for the subject. And upon searching with the subject's true full name, we found a very serious fraud investigation involving that subject. And I think they were trying to hide essentially that from us using the name that they had been using. So, in thinking about things like that, would AI have caught that in those exact, scenario? Probably not. So I think that, just an example of why kind of that human oversight is so important. The decisions made off the back of compliance processes and due diligence can have very significant consequences for a company, and therefore the information that forms the basis of those decisions really has to be accurate and thorough, which today I still requires the type of that kind of contextual understanding and learned investigative experience that I would say is pretty unique still to a human being. So that also, that's not to mention that one, there are many times when a specific nuanced source or database, like Yahya mentioned, is needed to dig further into something. And two, if regulators come knocking, they probably would not be terribly pleased to learn that you're relying solely on AI.
Thank you. Yeah, really helpful. Human sourcing of materials. And then I think you mentioned context, and context is absolutely key, but also learned experience and that kind of cultural nous as well in some cases. I know you previously spoken about workflow design and how to have AI and humans work together in a really efficient way. I wondered if you wanted to pick up on that.
Yeah, so if you visualize the kind of circular continuum of KYC or third-party due diligence programs, for example, you really start with kind of the onboarding, risk ranking, and initial due diligence. I think AI fits squarely in that early stage of the process. So in the past, the first level of due diligence was often just a sanctions and watch list search or screen, which was effective, of course, of screening for those records, but provided nothing in the way of background on the counterparty itself. To obtain that, you'd historically kind of need to jump to your next level of due diligence, which probably, jumped a decent amount in cost because it involved a lot more human intelligence gathering. Um, so I would say AI as what like Xapien has developed can either kind of replace that sanctions and watch list screen to provide you with a much more robust profile on the counterparty to work from initially, or depending on your program, could become a level two for lower risk third parties or customers. I think either way, it allows for much greater speed at the time of onboarding and more immediate insights into your third party. I'd also say that having that more robust profile initially and with minimal labor can also help with the risk ranking process to allow for better understandings of the third parties and where they might require escalation or enhanced levels of due diligence. So for example, if I run a name through our Verity AI tool, which incorporates Xapien, and I see a red flag that, a counterparty has a prospective ties to Russia, a high risk jurisdiction, I am likely going to then recommend to my client that they go ahead with deeper dive due diligence into those potential ties in Russia. So in that scenario, had I just run a sanctions and watch list initially, probably could have missed that unless the counterparty itself, of course, was sanctioned. So I think overall organizations need to identify the pain points in their processes where information gathering is taking too long, or alternatively is not providing them with the initial information they need, and look to apply AI in those areas.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Um, And yeah, here I'm keen to come to you on that as well. And also, I think we'll roll in closing remarks. But so when you're thinking about a practical way to introduce AI into an organization or in a consultancy, how do you ensure good adoption? And then any closing remarks that you'd like to add, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a couple things to think about there. The first, if I put my product hat on for a second, if I'm looking at a compliance process, it's very important to understand, like Emily alluded to earlier, that LLMs on their own or even agentic AI on its own is not a solution, it's more of a tool, right? And in that sense, you have to make sure that these types of technologies are seamlessly integrated in whatever process you already have or will have in the future. We see a lot of companies that, start adopting really interesting AI, but it exists completely outside of the day-to-day software that that team has to use, and or is completely disconnected from it. So, some of the efficiency gains there, or even adoption, start suffering, right? At the end of the day, at least for the foreseeable future, there will still be humans in front of computers clicking buttons and using keyboards. And in that sense, the process has to seamlessly integrate AI where possible, and fit into whatever your teams would have been historically doing or you expect them to do in the future, right? AI will not do the entire end-to-end compliance process for the foreseeable future, so the integration is critical. The other part to me that is always foundational is proper alignment. I'm a big believer that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you could have the best strategy you want, but if you don't actually create alignment among your teams, and maybe a couple of people use this flashy new AI tool you gave them and the other ones don't, you would not, as an organization, see the efficiency gains or even risk mitigation gains that we're talking about here today. So I think I would think about these two when bringing AI into a compliance process and a research team, or really in any organization that's wanting to incorporate that technology. Now for a closing remark, I know for most of this conversation, we on purpose, had me talking about the human side of it, right? Despite being the product person, for good reason, because that is relevant to our industry. But I will close with one last cheesy saying that I'm also a big believer in, which is, I'm only getting older and the AI is only getting better, right? So I also think there's some, hubris in our human take on technology and what it's going to do in months or years. And it's important to find the balance between the two. Everything we said today is as of right now, July 15th, 2025, but this is a very fast-moving space. So I think adaptability and keeping up with what's happening is also critical for anyone in our industry.
Thank you, Yahir. That's really helpful. Yeah, that change management piece. And I think also it speaks to what you were saying earlier, Erin, about doing it early in the process, because that helps to embed the change early on, and time to value. People can see the results very quickly. Emily, do you have any final comments on your top tips for mitigating AI implementation risks, and then some general closing remarks as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is about interrogating the solution that you're planning to implement. I think really making sure that you understand it. And from what we have seen from some of the cases that have already occurred, regulators will expect you to be able to explain the solution that you're using and why and how it fits in. That needs to be clearly documented. So I think you want to make sure that any provider you're working with can walk you through that and give you the confidence and give you comfort that it protects from some of those risks that I was speaking about earlier. I think from a regulatory standpoint, they will be seeking to see policies and procedures and good governance in place for any use of AI. And I think one thing to be very cautious of is, if you're be cautious of being too slow to act on finding an AI solution, because people in your organization will likely be using it even without your say so. And having them using unauthorized or unchecked models is going to be a much greater risk for your organization than actually vetting and embracing one that you can trust. So I would really, recommend, taking that approach and, coming at it with the right level of caution. But as Yahya said, really trying to find that sweet spot between not being overly cautious and frightened of AI, embracing what it has to offer and embracing the efficiencies that it can afford, but coming at it with those levels of protections and that analysis and assessment that's needed.
Thank you so much, Emily. And Erin, your final closing thoughts.
A couple quick things. I mean, one, I would not limit yourself. There's the market there's a lot of AI tools out there right now. I know I have looked at a lot of them. Yahya has as well. And, I think considering a tool such as kind of a Xapien and working with kind of an outside partner such as us at Mintz Group or Xapien, who have really kind of been in the weeds in these things, and have been in the industry and then now are building the products, I think is incredibly beneficial where when you don't really know kind of where to start. So start small, but as Yahya said, the pace of this is moving very quickly. So aligning yourselves with those of us who kind of have a bigger, kind of more solid grasp and know kind of the nuances and where it might fit in best, I think is will certainly be a benefit to many organizations.
Thank you. That's really helpful. I think, yes, ending with that, this is a partnership. It's a partnership with the technology firm, it's a partnership with your consultants, and bringing everyone together is really the best way to tackle it. So thank you all so, so much for your comments today. We do have a bunch of questions coming in, and the best thing to do there is you can either email us on a couple of email addresses that are going to be dropped into the chat now, but we will also follow up with an email of the recording for all of you guys and further ways to get in touch. We also have our conference on the 8th of October coming up, which we would love to see some of you guys at, and we'll be there and able to answer any further questions. Thank you, Mintz Group. Thank you, Emily, and thank you to all of our watchers again. We'll catch you next time.